So knowing your documents is kind of one of the most important things. It's also one of the scariest things and definitely one of the most overwhelming things. Um, right, anybody who's tried to go through your papers by yourself, it's topsy-turvy. So I'm going to go over just the documents for proof of citizenship. At any point, if you have questions, please let me know. Put them in the chat, shout them out. And if you have any questions at the end, I'm going to stop the recording again so that we can have a chat, kind of a Q&A session after this. And then if there's any particular personal questions or anything that you need, um, I'm happy to stay after, or we can get in contact at another time. Okay. So I think one of the biggest questions that I've heard in the last year is, am I a US citizen? And unfortunately, it's a kind of a case by case scenario. It depends on the year your adoption was finalized, your age at the time, and then also if the adoption was finalized in the US. So I'm going to kind of go over three scenarios: pre 2001 adoptions, then 2001 to 2008, and then other cases. So the simplest check is, do you have a US passport? If you're a US citizen, you are eligible for a US passport. So if you have a US passport, great, you're a US citizen, right? That's the easiest, simplest check that you can do. Now, what if you don't have a passport? So there was a long, long list on the US Department of State's webpage, on how do I know if I'm eligible. And a lot of that comes down to, you need your birth certificate, you need your adoption records, you need proof that you're living in the United States, and then a whole bunch of other documents. So I decided I'll put the link there. It is at the end of the presentation as well. So you can check for yourselves if that's something that you need to do. Okay, so pre 2001. So if you were 18 years or older as of February 27th, 2001, there are different adoption rules that apply to you. So you first need to double check that your adoption was legally finalized in the United States. That's the biggest thing. Then you can apply for naturalization using Form N-400, and that's the application for naturalization. You'll fill that out and you can send that in. If you need access to documents and that you used or your family used an accredited or an approved adoption service provider who acted as your primary provider throughout the adoption, you can file a Freedom of Information Act, which will grant you access to your adoption and immigration related documents. I know sometimes documents are either lost or adoptive parents don't want to hand them over, or it's like, I don't know if I have that, and my parents don't know if I have that. So it's a great way to, request all of your documents. And then as a closer look, these are what both of the documents look like. You can just Google like USCIS Form N-400 for the naturalization, or USCIS Form G-639, or USCIS Freedom of Information, USCIS application for naturalization. So those are kind of your simplest ways if your adoption was finalized. Okay. Next, If you were under 18 years old on February 27th, 2001, you can apply via the Child Citizen Act of 2000, which allows foreign-born adopted children to obtain citizenship before the age of 18. So you have to have all these requirements. You have to be adopted by a US citizen, at least one. You have to be a lawful permanent resident, and then you have to reside in the United States. So those three things, and then we'll break down how do I know that I'm lawfully a permanent resident of the United States. So depending on the type of visa that you were granted to enter the country, it depends on what steps you'll need to take to prove permanent residency. So the first one is an IR3, which means the adoption was finalized abroad, and that often automatically grants citizenship. Or an IR4, which the adoption is finalized in the US, and then citizenship is granted after it's finalized in the US. IR4s are typically more common, and it's typically like if you have a green card in your paperwork, you entered on an IR4. So double checking if you have access to your papers, which visa, can help sort out, right? Did I have automatic citizenship because my adoption was finalized in Guatemala, or do I need to apply in the United States? So then these are the most common types of proof of residency for the Child Citizen Act. So we have the green card or permanent residence card, which allows foreign nationals to live and work in the United States. Or you have an I-551 stamp, which is a stamp that has been placed in your passport. It would be your Guatemalan passport, the one that you are entering the country on. And it is proof that you are a lawful permanent resident. I entered on a green card, and most people that I know also entered on a green card. What they look like, and these are samples. You can either have a green card, which is on the left, right? It's a physical card that you receive. You might have a photocopy scan, or on the right is the I-551 stamp. And that stamp essentially acts as the green card in stamp form. So either one of these will prove that you're a lawful permanent resident. And then using that, you can apply if you're under the age of 18 via the CCA, the Child Citizen Act. Okay? But then what about other cases? So first of all, what if you are older? There's a lot of pathways, right? We talked about a few of them, of the simplest ones of my adoption was finalized. Great, you can apply for naturalization. What if you're kind of like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it was finalized before I turned 18, right? Please consult an attorney, especially in today's age. I would rather you consult an attorney than not, okay? And then what if your adoption was not finalized? If you're under 18, you can discuss this with your adoptive parents. And the simplest path forward would be to be readopted and to have the adoption finalized in the US. And then if you're over 18, again, please consult an attorney. For both of these cases, for any of these cases, you can always consult an attorney if you have any questions. They have the most up-to-date information on immigration, on adoption, and on the changes that are happening currently, right? Some of the resources that I list in a minute talk about where can I access an attorney. And there are different places, and we can talk about that in a second. Okay, so I'm still scared. What other resources should I know about? And these are my top 4 resources that I think everybody, regardless of like citizenship or not, should know about in today's climate. So the first are the red card and the emergency family plan. So the red card, let's see, I have one right here. I don't, but it's about the size of like a little business card, and it has your constitutional rights on it. So if ICE shows up at your door, what do? You don't open the door. You don't answer any questions. You do not sign anything, and you do not, right, like open the door a little bit to like slip this out, right? You can show the card through a window. You can slip it under the door, right? Um, but do not open that door again. And if you're outside, showing that card, right? If you're in your car, putting it up against the car window, whatever you need to do. And on the other side, so this is the side that you would read. On the other side, it has all of the amendments, the constitutional amendments that protect these rights. Um, and based on kind of anecdotal evidence, I know people are handing them out coffee shops, bookshops, community resource centers. When I went online to grab this photo, they said that they've had an unprecedented amount of people downloading and printing out red cards. And, NPR, all of the big newspapers have cited that red cards are making a difference in our community. Next, the family emergency plan. So, this is what do I do if something happens to me? You write it all down in one place. So, what about my car payments? What about rent? What about utilities? What about my family members? Am I a parent? Right? Um, do I have a pet? Do I go to school? Do I live with my parents? Do I have any medical conditions? All of that information gets put into this document, and then you can either keep the document with you, you could give it to a trusted friend or family member, right? And it's what I like to call kind of like the anxiety reliever of we might be having all this anxiety, like what do I do? What happens if something happens to me, right? What if I'm detained? What if I'm deported? Well, you put it all down, right? You write it all down and you make a step-by-step plan so that you don't have to carry around the anxiety. And then, worst case scenario, you have it, right? You have the consulate's number for Guatemala. You have an immigration attorney's number. Um, right? You might put down your allergies if you have any, and it's all saved in one place. So that if you're unable to access, you know, your rent for the month, right? Then somebody knows I need to call this person, um, or I need to figure out how to pay their rent. It's usually this month, right? Etc. The other thing that I'll say that makes adoptees unique is what do I do if I'm deported? Most individuals, if they're not deported to a third country, they have family in the country, right? And if they're not deported to a third country, they may speak the language. So, writing down, I don't speak Spanish, if that's the case for you. or I don't know anybody in country, right? All of that is useful for an immigration attorney or for anybody, right? But for somebody who can help you to have that information written down to say, I don't speak the language and I don't know but anybody in country. If you deport me, where am I supposed to go? Right? That's a very valid question. And I think it's something that causes a lot of anxiety. But if you put it down and an attorney looks at that, that's leverage they can use. Okay. Next, know your rights trainings and community resources. So, know your rights trainings are happening all over the country. I love the ACLU ones. I think they're 10 out of 10. They're so great. They often have them online. So if you follow the ACLU on social media, they'll post, like, this is a nationwide Zoom Know Your Rights training. You can also find them at like immigrant rights centers. You can find them through your local ACLU or any kind of local program that's offering these trainings, like an immigration office, perhaps, uh, anything like that. They might be in person, they might be on Zoom. Um, they're often bilingual, so they're often will be in Spanish and English. Double check. Um, there have been a lot of Know Your Rights trainings that are solely offered in Spanish, so double check for language requirements. Then the next thing is community resources. Reaching out to your community is so important, right? Whether that's I don't feel safe walking to the bus, can somebody come with me? Right? Or, I mean, Minnesota strong, you know, let's talk about what they did. They had people standing at the corners, providing meals and groceries, um, providing daycare services. I heard about I think they call it like an underground doctor system where doctors were making home visits. Great, tapping into these community resources that already exist is a great way not only not to feel so lonely, but also we're not reinventing the wheel. Okay, and then these are just all of the links. I do want to point out the Adoptee Rights Law Center. They are an amazing, amazing organization that specifically works with adoptees and adoptee rights. And one of their main campaigns is citizenship. Definitely check them out if you have any questions. Online, it does say that they offer a lot of their services pro bono, meaning at no cost. So definitely check that out if that's something that you are needing. Other legal services that I recommend would be Catholic Community Services. You do not need to be Catholic to go. They helped me apply for a certificate of naturalization. Super smooth process. They know what's going on. It's a nationwide organization. Some of the other ones, IRC, the um, International Refugee Committee, another great organization. Or you could just Google great immigration attorney near me. And just make sure you look at all the reviews, you make sure that they're accredited, etc.